Welcome to the Business Grind, where we give you an inside perspective on what it takes to start, build, and run a successful business. Here are your hosts, Danny Shaw and Sean Michael Wellington.
Hello to everyone in podcast land today. Thanks for joining us. Sean, how you feeling?
Feeling good and ready to cross over and slam dunk into the topic.
Did you have that? Was you waiting to say that? I feel like you was waiting to say that.
It kind of just came to me as we were talking. But
all right, well, I'm not even mad. Good way to set it up. All right, so today's episode, we're going to discuss Untold, the rise and fall of AND1, the documentary. We're going to, obviously share our thoughts, some key takeaways, and, just discuss which parts resonated with us, and all that good stuff as we do in our business reviews of movies and so forth, right? All right, so there's a lot going on here. Where would we like to begin first, Sean?
I think we should probably start with explaining for those who may not know what AND1 is. We may have some younger listeners, or maybe just not in part of that culture. So let's explain what AND1 is.
Let's get into it. All right, so for the uninitiated, I guess we can say AND1 was a clothing and basketball sneaker company, right? That was essentially their whole aesthetic, their whole brand was really based around street culture, street basketball culture, right?
Yeah, so like sneakers and athletic wear, t-shirts and things like that.
Right. And initially when they first started, they started as the t-shirt company, and the t-shirt company was essentially just slogans of trash talk that you would say at in basketball game along with the logo of their character. So it'd be like pass the ball, save yourself the embarrassment and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. Like just a whole bunch of different phrases and trash talk with the logo of the character. Oh, and also let's explain the term AND1. So AND1 is a term you say when you're playing basketball and as you are going to score, you might get fouled, and even as you're getting fouled, you still shoot it or do something, and the ball still goes in. So that point counts as well as the additional foul, the extra point, the AND1. So, I'm trying to lay up, somebody grab me, I get it in, and you yell AND1, right? So that is the, where the name comes from for the company, right?
Yeah, and it kind of underscores that they were very much like tapping into the street ball culture, right? Because you don't say "and1" people probably say it, but you don't officially call "and1" in an NBA game, right?
Right.
There's no "and1" on the scoreboard or anything like that. So It's definitely moving away from traditional NBA and basketball athletics and really diving into like the street culture and the vernacular.
So. Exactly. So that's definitely the genesis or the foundation of what AND-ball is about. Did you rock AND1 when you was coming up, Sean?
I didn't.
Okay.
I always, like, everyone around me did. I just never, I had one of those old school West Indian parents who didn't necessarily buy you all the designers. So during that time, I couldn't really pull in AND1. They wouldn't buy me AND1.
They was not with it.
Nah, but it was very, very, everyone in class was wearing them. I remember that.
It was like, and none for you. None.
Yeah.
All right. So I rocked the shorts a few times. I had a few AND1 shorts, but I'm going to say, it's going to sound corny, but whatever.
Is it going to date you? What?
Nah, it's not even that. I didn't like to wear the shirts because I just thought the logo was ugly. The logo was the faceless basketball player with his shorts and playing ball. And to me, because I was illustrating and drawing and all of that good stuff, it just always looked like an unfinished drawing. It looked like a lot of my unfinished drawings, to be quite honest. It's like no face, no nothing, just a rough sketch. And, the logo just didn't really appeal to me, to be quite honest. But I get why it was, illustrated and drawn and stuff like that. But I definitely had a few shorts, oversized shorts, trying to cut it up on the courts for sure.
So where do you think, just to give it some context, we got Adidas, we got, Reebok, we got Nike. Where did AND1 like fit in terms of popularity and at its peak, you think?
Oh, AND1 was up there without question. I think, and we're going to get into that. I think at a certain point, AND1 was definitely up there in popularity. If we talking about streetwear, street culture, listen, I know there's pictures floating around me somewhere where I used to be into all the brands, right? There was another brand. Oh man, we might have to do an episode on that. There's another brand called School of Hard Knocks that I used to. Oh god, I used to love that brand religiously. The logos, the drawings, all of that stuff, of the characters. And
Yeah, I remember they used to abbreviate. It would be SOHH a lot.
Yep, yep.
Or HN, sorry,
Yeah,
HN.
yeah, yeah. So School of Hard Knocks, AND1, but AND1 was up there. Like AND1 was considered the, uh, it wasn't as big as Nike, but if you was cool and you was on the streets and playing ball and all that, you definitely AND1 definitely had props. It had a lot of cool points with the kids back then for sure. Yeah, yeah. But as we'll see, couldn't really maintain that long-term longevity due to various reasons, right?
Right.
Right. But yeah, it was up there for sure. It was definitely up there, without question.
Yeah, I mean, it was AND1, and it was I feel like there was a lot of you know, again, this is not street ball culture. This is a little different of a brand, but I feel like Fubu was big too. It was AND1 and Fubu, kind of like the two.
Yeah. AND1, Fubu. There was a lot of. I don't want to say iceberg. I think that might be putting it in a little bit different area.
That was a little, and I think that was a little late, at least for me. That was a little later. That was like, Jay-Z made Iceberg hot, or whoever did at the time.
Okay, so. Fair enough. All right. So I think that's enough of a foundation or intro to people who may not be aware of what AND1 was. Or
right. So you know what it means now, and you know
right.
what the brand actually is.
You know why I wasn't rocking those shirts, but maybe I'll rock a few of the shorts, all that good stuff. All right. So let's get it. So as we said, it started as a t-shirt, company initially, and it was started by three gentlemen from I believe they were grad students at Pennsylvania's Wharton School. And that's where
the Wharton Business School. Yep.
So that's where they started. So they were grad students, but they played ball a lot, and I believe one of the gentlemen was like, all his other classmates was focusing on what they wanted to do, and he didn't even know what he wanted to do. He just wanted to play, I think, ball all day or something like that. And he just kind of connected with the two other guys at the universities, and they just started putting this idea together and started with the t-shirts, and then kind of let it, become what it eventually became, which was a multi-million-dollar company, right?
Yeah, and those t-shirts and the slogans they would put on there that you alluded to earlier was like a big part of their early push, right? That's how they kind of got the public notice, is with those original shirts, and you would see quotes that you would see and hear in street ball games, but you would never see them in stores until AND1.
Right. So I mean, I guess my understanding is that they started in 1993, but then by 96, which is only like 3 years later, they had Stephon Marbury as their first spokesperson for the sneaker, which, not for nothing, is a pretty fast turnaround. Right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, we started this in college 3 years later. We got Stephon Marbury. What, did he get injured while wearing their sneakers?
Yeah, so the actual name of the sneaker that they created for the Marburys, they were called ankle breakers, and he actually broke his ankle, so it was like horrible, just the worst case scenario for them. Yeah.
Terrible. And if in the documentary, the owners are talking about how, after that injury happened, Stephon Marbury's, his people, his agents was just looking at the owners like, yo, we're about to trash your whole company. Like, you know what I'm saying? So they were like almost done before they even started, right? So they kind of went back to the drawing board. They wasn't really messing with sneakers anymore. And then around that time, I would say from around 96, I will say, this documentary, it did kind of mess me up because of the timelines. I will say some of the stuff that they were saying in the documentary, I was like, oh, I didn't remember it like that, right? So it really made me have to circle back on the timelines. But around after the whole Marbury situation till around 98, they were still doing their thing, clothings and stuff like that, but they wasn't really doing sneakers like that, right? They were just really trying to expand the brand overall with the gear and the clothing. They came across a videotape, which was essentially like street ball, stunts, by local high schoolers in New York, mainly Rayford Alston, who, to people who are familiar with streetball culture, is known as Skip to My Lou, right?
Hmm.
So leveraging that tape and just all these highlights, it wasn't NBA highlights. It was like street ball highlights. You know what I mean? Like, they use that in the footage to leverage their brand a bit more and become more prominent. Now, this is one area I do want to just make a little note about, because in the documentary, they really try to. I feel like they try to associate it with the Rucker
A little bit,
a
at least
little
from the
bit.
footage. Yes,
Yeah,
that's
from the
true.
footage, and that wasn't necessarily the case. So people who are not familiar with the Rucker is a basketball tournament in Harlem, world famous, world renowned. You go there to kind of earn your stripes. It's been going on for years, decades, generations. Dr. J been out there, Kobe. All the how would I say, NBA legends who kind of want to earn their street stripes go and play in some of there, right?
Yeah,
To an extent. So it's it's a battleground. You earn your stripes and so forth. But in the documentary, they kind of try to associate it with Rucker, which I was like, I think that's a little bit misrepresentation, though. But I guess it was done to kind of illustrate the importance of street ball and why it's so important to the culture. All right.
yeah. I don't know. I want to get your thoughts, but to me, it was interesting that they were kind of they took a L, right?
Mm-hmm.
Marbury going down, that
Mm-hmm.
ruined their all the branding and the optics for their new sneaker,
Mm-hmm.
and they kind of got gifted this lifeline out of nowhere with this street ball footage that you're talking about. But it
Right.
wasn't anything, people did the work for them.
Right.
People put together this compilation of street ball and sent it to them, right? Sent it
Uh-huh.
to them.
Right.
So they really just got gifted this, and it was a blessing. They used it, and they were able to rebrand and rebuild their audience off of the AND1 mixtapes, what they became known as eventually. So
Mm-hmm.
just curious, what do you think about that? It's like sometimes you get blessed with a happy accident and it helps your business, but it seems as though that was such a core part of their business. Granted, they started in apparel and sneakers, but the Animal mixtape is what is their marketing. That's how
Right.
everybody knew them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting that that's not something that they originated, that they created.
Well, I don't think they could have originated that. If it's just gonna be, sometimes you are gifted a gift to help the business, and you're blessed and fortunate that something comes your way, and then sometimes you're able to create something. But if we're just being transparent, I don't think the founders would have been able to think of doing a mixtape as an idea to help their brand. For what it is, right? Like, it's street ball, it's street culture. The founders was not from the streets. They're three white guys, right? Who were at Wharton in grad school. Like, I personally would not have. I wouldn't expect them to be playing street ball or even to know about that aspect of basketball culture, right?
Yeah, it
So,
was even though they were able to tap into through their love of basketball, a part
right.
of the culture that they may not have had access to before,
Mm-hmm.
the and one mixtape was a whole nother side of it. Like it was even deeper into that culture,
Right.
and they got gifted it. Yeah.
Yeah, they even said they ain't even know what it was. I was like, what is this? They literally said, what is this? Right? So, and these things happen sometimes. So they was definitely gifted, and then they said, they started giving these mixtapes out and so forth, and then like over the weekend, I guess people were calling and saying, hey, when's the next mixtape coming out? We need to see more of these highlight reels and so forth, and kind of just boomed and boomed their business even more so, right? But speaking of being gifted, they was also gifted another scenario to help the business, right? And that was Vince Carter
Yeah.
wearing. Vince Carter was wearing their sneakers for free during his famous All Star dunk competition, right?
Yeah, probably one of the most famous
Mo-
dunk contests of all time, and
Yeah,
Vince Carter just happened to be wearing them. Yeah.
yeah. And I remember watching that All Star dunking contest actually. But yeah, that was a moment in the culture, right? That contest right there, and Vince Carter won in stunning fashion while wearing and one sneakers, the Tai Chi's, I believe, and was wearing it for free, which also boosted the AND1 profile even more and even made them more successful, right? They're having considerable success at this moment. At this point, you know, they got NBA recognition. They have the streets, right, as well. And then they're also on the radar of Nike all of a sudden, right?
Yeah, in terms of competition, right?
Right. So, you know, this little upstart is doing their thing and trying to figure things out. And then, you know, Nike's like, who are these folks over here? And then I guess video footage got leaked at one of the Nike board meetings that essentially had the AND1 logo in a crosshair as a target. Like, we got to get them out the paint, right?
Yeah.
So now, you know, you go from, again, this is from 93 to late 90s to, you know, you went from a startup in college to now you're on Nike's radar and they're trying to take you out the game. Meanwhile, you're still trying to figure out even what your own company and culture is about. But they are having tremendous success. Like, they are, you know, there's a saying when sometimes when the money comes, it comes so fast at once, you kind of get overwhelmed, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, and that kind of seems like what happened with them. They were growing so fast, deals. You know, they had to expand their office. They had a basketball court set up in the office. Then they started doing the AND1 mixtape tours. You know, it was a lot going on at once, right?
They discussed a lot about the creative, right? Because there were three founders, and one of them was just kind of in a cave creating designs and just banging them out the whole time. So he wasn't really he was setting himself up for burnout, put it that way.
He definitely was setting himself up for burnout. Like, I think he moved to Taiwan at one point just to focus on the sneakers designs and the production of the sneakers. And they was selling, they was bangers, they was some good designs and they was selling, but he was burnt out and he was talking about how, you know, they was calling him 3 a.m. from the United States, like, how's the new designs coming? And, you know, he really was hermit mode and then burnt himself out by the work that he did and for the sneakers and for the company as a whole, right?
Yeah.
So make note of that when people talk about grinding and I die when you sleep when I'm dead type mentality for the business, because he was close to death for the business.
And it was affecting, you know, it affects the business. If your main creative who's designing everything gets burnt out, then where do you go from there?
I would like to talk a little bit about the actual tour and the mixtapes, because I don't think people might be fully aware of what that was, right?
Yeah.
So the tour was essentially AND1 going on tour to different cities, putting on these basketball games with their roster of street basketball players, right? To help promote the brand and all of that stuff, right? So you had these players, and you know, they had these entertaining names. It was like wrestling names, right? Not you had like Skip to Malou, who I already mentioned. You had Hot Sauce, right? You had a Half Man, Half Amazing. You had the Dribble Machine. You had the Professor. Can't forget about the Professor. Main Event, AO. It was just a lot of folks, with these names. Helicopter. It was quite the roster of these street ballers who would go on tour and put on these shows and wow the crowd. But it was fun. It was entertaining. By no means was it an NBA game, right? Whole different structure, but it was very successful and really brought the crowds out in their own right and really attracted, like, I would say, the youth of the culture. They really tapped into it, and along with these tours, they was giving out again the highlight reels, the tapes, all of that stuff. It was its own movement, and it was its own movement. And I don't say that lightly, right? It's definitely its own movement. So when does the trouble start, Sean?
Well, you alluded to it a little bit with Nike, right? Nike was on their heels, and the turning point was kind of another infamous commercial that I'm sure maybe burned into your memories from the 90s or 90s/2000s. But that I don't even know how to describe it. What do you call it? Like the DJ?
It was
Nike commercial.
The way I described it, because that was a hot commercial. I ain't gonna front. I remember.
They killed it.
They killed that commercial. So Nike essentially, I don't know what I would call it. I would just call it that Nike commercial when they was bouncing the ball to a beat. That was but it was hot, right? And
Yeah.
it was very iconic. I mean, I remember even one of them scary
Scary
movies. Yeah,
movie.
did a
It was a
spoof
scary
on
movie
it,
too. Yeah,
right?
they did a little spoof on it.
That was a very cultural defining commercial and signal to the basketball culture. So yeah, essentially, Nike, they didn't really have a way into that market just yet, but they saw what AND1 was doing, and AND1 ain't, I guess, didn't have the vision, or just they still figuring other things out. Nike said, "All right, good, we got this. We're gonna do our own version of that." Did that commercial, had all the NBA stars, which also included Vince Carter, surprisingly, who back in the day had endorsed the AND1s for free, right?
Right.
AND1 was in the Nike. Vince Carter was in the Nike commercial, and that.
Which I'm sure was intentional. Come
Oh
on,
yeah,
like,
that was a little little bravado there. And that was a major blow to AND1. It wasn't like the knockout punch, but that right there definitely shifted the perspective, I think, a bit, because Nike has always been like a mainstay in the basketball culture. Like, we don't need to undersell that, right? Like, Nike has always been around, but there was, at that time, Nike really wasn't the streets, right?
yeah, they weren't. They didn't have a street ball lane yet, and that
Right.
just opened it up wide for them, and they're taking market share away from AND1 now.
Right, right. So that was one of the big blows to AND1 that kind of started, putting a little cracks in their defense. What would you say was the other, blows to the company?
I think the other big thing was the tour, right? You talked about the tour, and it was a successful idea and a smart way to, expand the audience, get your talent out there. But they didn't seem to have, and this is my opinion now, I'm editorializing a little bit. You can tell me if you disagree, but they didn't seem to have the talent relations infrastructure needed to make that work.
I didn't even think of that. You're right. I was looking at it from just. That's a good way to put it. The talent relationship infrastructure was not in place.
Yeah,
that is good. I didn't think of it like that. Yeah, that
I
was
mean,
just,
because it was really,
yeah.
it was really a lot of relationship, and it was just a lot of communication. Things that if you had a head of talent relations or head of player management, player operations, whatever you call it, right? They might have mitigated some of those issues.
You're right. I didn't think of it. I was looking at it from a perspective of they didn't think it through. I was just thinking as a operation. They didn't think the tour through from a business operation. But you kind of hit it right on the head when you said the talent relationship wasn't there. And so, from my understanding, these tours was only done, on short sprints, right? Like during the summer and stuff like that. So they weren't like competing with the NBA and trying to do that, but they had these little 3-month tours, and they would pay the players accordingly. Now this is where it started getting dicey, right? Because initially everyone's in the struggle together, and we see the transition. They were in these little broken down vans going from city to city with these tours. To now that the money's coming in, and they're playing all over the world. They're playing in Japan and China internationally, and then you start seeing, okay, well, so-and-so's contract is getting more based off, what are we basing it on? Is it off popularity? Is it off of merchandise? Then we start seeing the animosities and the infighting amongst the players because of this, right? They had players. The players would have to go to the factories as a courtesy to greet the people who was packing up the AND1 merchandise. They would also see, at the events, all this merchandise with their likeness being on the merchandise. And even it was even a point where there was video games, right? There was video games, AND1 video games and TV shows, and they weren't getting compensated, or they felt they didn't get fairly compensated. Kind of led to the turmoil all of a sudden. What was once harmony amongst the players started really turning into a lot of tension and infighting, right?
Yeah. And then you talked about it, like why is this person making more than this next person, right? And for the creators and the founders, there could have been a perfect justification for all those reasons, right? This person's selling more merchandise. This person, whatever the case may be. I'm sure there's plenty of reasons, but if it's not being effectively communicated to the talent, they're just going to feel some type of way, and then they're going to, be in competition with each other, and not in a good way, and not a healthy competition. They're going to be financially trying to compete with each other. So
right, and as we saw, there was some players who were more popular, so they were getting the bigger checks. Like Hot Sauce was a superstar, right? He had like a talking car and 2 houses, and he even had that movie. I forgot he was in that street ball movie
with Wayne Brady, yes,
yeah,
and Anthony Mackie.
yeah. Is it called Crossover? I think it was called Crossover,
yep.
Right?
It is
so,
Crossover. Yep.
Hot Sauce was obviously, he was a phenomenon. And then you had Professor, who, Professor was popular, but then you saw a little bit of the animosity, and like what I saw with the Professor was like they embraced him at first. It's like, oh, he's the white guy that can ball. But then when it started bringing him that popularity and obviously a bigger contract than some of the other players, kind of looked like, all right,
jealousy.
And that was unfortunate. And Skip to Malou, who was an NBA player as well as a street baller, so I feel like he might not have been as pressed about the contracts as some of the other players. So you just started seeing some of that. But I do agree. I think that could have been a situation that could have been avoided if the owners had, like you said, talent relationship, maybe just communicated what the basis of compensation, what the compensation was based on and stuff like that, instead of just, you don't want to leave things to speculation, right?
Yep.
And I will say, I think there's another point that I picked up, or at least I just made when I watched it, was that you had people from 2 different worlds, right? You had people doing business from 2 different worlds, and the culture and values of one arena may not have translated to the other, right? So for a lot of these players, street ballers and stuff like that, it's street ball. They are from the streets, right? It's nothing. Don't need to sugarcoat it. They may the perception of what should and should not have happened may not have been apparent to them right away, right?
Right.
And so maybe they were not aware of, well, I should be compensated like this, or not even saying what they should be compensated, just to even ask and to discuss to see what is even a possibility, right?
Now you're referring to the players, right? Not necessarily.
I'm talking about the players. Not
necessarily being involved in their compensation structure. Yeah,
right. Like I just think if I'm watching it, oh man, I could, that topic alone could be an episode in itself, because when I got to that part, it really reminded me of like the music industry and how a lot of these rap crews, it's all love at one point, but then when the money stops flowing in, then that's when we start hearing all the stories. I got robbed. I wasn't compensated. But when everything is good and, everybody on tour and, seeing the world, it's exciting and it's fun and you live in life, and that's great, as it should be. But then I don't want to say you do neglect to cover the business side, but I also think there's just that reluctance because you don't want to mess up the good time, right?
Good thing. Yep. Don't mess with a good thing. And you're scared to ask the questions thinking, oh, they might realize you don't belong here.
Right. So, and I kind of felt I got a lot of that towards the end of the documentary when it started talking about the fallout and who got paid and who didn't get paid. And that was very unfortunate to see and hear about,
I mean, yeah, you're right, because they took a bunch of street ballers and they were like, y'all could come on tour and make more money, make money playing ball.
And probably more money than you've ever made.
Sure. And just that thought is like, I could make money to play basketball, what I'm doing anyway, okay. But once you start seeing the checks and other people getting different zeros or whatever it is, you're not going to think about it as fun and, oh, I'm just grateful to be here anymore. Now you care about your value and your worth. So.
Right. And I think another thing to be mindful of is that for a lot of these players, the dreams, the opportunity to play in the NBA was not there, right? Like most of them, they had passed their prime NBA playing years, right? They had of getting drafted, and even some of them admitted, like, I just didn't have that basketball IQ to be an NBA player, or I didn't have that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And NBA is a whole different type of rules and different sets. So for them, it's like this is like my last shot. I think, to an extent, right? Like, it's what else am I gonna do? So we're gonna do it. We're gonna take it, and then ultimately, this is, we saw the outcome of that, the fallout from that.
Yep. And they probably made a lot of money along the way. They being the players and the creators. But yeah, ultimately, we talked about Nike and we talked about the tour. Kind of were some of the biggest catalysts in their downfall.
Yeah, yeah. And so ultimately, there was other things happening along the way. You started seeing like, just this is where it got a little confusing for me, and maybe I just couldn't understand. Was they started when they sold the company? The founders sold the company, but I don't think I was totally clear on what happened. It wasn't like they were losing money. Right? Like, did you get that sense? I just got the sense that they just decided to get out and sell the company.
I'll be honest. I got the sense that it was too much for them to handle. So it was partially the pressure from Nike, them, being down in their market and taking their market share. Part of that, and also the stress of dealing with the players and all of those issues. That's just the impression I got from the documentary. It may not be exactly true, but that's the impression I got.
That's the way it was portrayed.
They didn't want to be involved anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of the same thing. Yeah, so it wasn't like they were bleeding money and had to liquidate and just go out of business. They were still a viable company, still doing their thing, but they decided that it was time to get out and sell the company, and this when it kind of felt just very tragic, right? Because what happened is the players were expecting updates to their contracts and expecting new contracts for the new tour, and they was just getting updates like, hey, something is about to happen, sit tight, we don't know what's going on. But basically, they didn't get any updates on what was happening. They didn't know if it was a sell or a buyout. They just really didn't know. And then the owners sold the company, and essentially that ended the tour. You know what I mean? Like, they sold the company, and that was it. They made their money, and then kind of left the players. At least the way it was portrayed, high and dry, or most of the players. Like, there may have been some players that were still retained for marketing services and stuff like that, and some, some overlap and contingency plans. But as a whole, the majority of roster was just kind of left to their own, right?
Yeah.
And that's when it got, and then you start hearing the testimonials from the players, and some of them just speaking to their experiences and what happened, and their disappointment that they didn't get even a phone call from the owners or no conversation. Nothing was really communicated. It's like, we sold the company and we're out.
Yep.
Yeah. So with that being said, right, what would you make of some of the testimonials from the players?
Well, the players, a lot of different perspectives, right?
Right.
But I think overall, in general, all of the players, they weren't really factored into the overall business structure. And what I mean by that is that when the AND1 mixtape took off, it was a content play for them, and it was a touring play for them. But I don't know how much, and they had contracts for their players and everything, but I don't know how much of it was a talent building and having these people as brand ambassadors. Even when they're not playing, they'll move on and help promote the company. Like, I don't know if they were thought about in that regard. They were just kind of commodities. They were part of the content, but they weren't thought as individual investments, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And one of the founders even reflected upon maybe they should have thought about setting up the players in a way where they had stock options so that they can be compensated, in the future down the road. You know what I'm saying? There's definitely a lot of misses, but that was a good point. Like, I don't think they looked at the players or the tour as a part of the bigger company vision. It was a piece that fueled the other part, but I don't think they recognized how important it was to the overall business. Right.
So I think that was part of the downfall, and it may have been the underscore for everything that we already talked about that led to the downfall. Maybe not so much the Nike thing. Nike was coming from them.
Nike was coming from them regardless. Yeah.
It could have been intentional, right? They could have felt after what happened with Marbury, they were like, "Look, we don't want to, we're gonna play this safe and not invest in people as much as the product.
Oh,
But that was the impression I got.
I didn't even think of that. That is a good point. After the Marbury scenario, they said we're good. We're changing strategies. Okay,
Could be. Could be.
I'm not mad at that. I did feel, towards the end when the different plays was talking about the company and the founders, I was a little conflicted with some of the testimonials. Right. Mainly, I don't know if you remember when Dribbling Machine and what's his name, his man's main event was talking in the room, right, towards the end, and Dribbling Machine, I felt bad for him, well, not bad for him, but bad at how his scenario turned out, right, because he was talking about how he's the type of work he's doing now, and people recognize him and, asking him about why is he here and stuff like that. And then hearing him talk about the owners and what his perspective was of the owners. And then you see like his man didn't really agree with him, right? Like Main Event didn't really agree with him, but Main Event didn't want to disagree with him on camera either.
On camera, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I kind of felt like Main Event, to be quite honest. Like I don't want to embarrass my man in front of the camera, but I don't necessarily agree with him. Like I don't think, and I've been there with my own people. You know what I mean, for similar scenarios. Like it's not. I get it when you've taken a L like that, and you kind of think about the missed opportunities and stuff. But I didn't necessarily agree with his perspective. But at the same time, I just felt like, damn, this is unfortunate that it had to come out be this way,
Yeah. Unfortunate is the perfect word. Yeah.
All right. So, with that being said, from a business perspective, what were some of your takeaways or learning lessons from watching this documentary about AND1?
I learned that content is king, right? And even back then, the content is what got them to the success that they achieved, that AND1 mixtape. So that's one big thing I think I learned from that. And then this is an opinion. Aside from the fact,
you have to give the disclaimer out the gate.
I have to, yeah. It's not going to apply to everything. But to this, I think in order to be successful in a foreign culture, you have to at least have some sort of grounding in that culture, whether it's a person who's your translator or something that keeps you grounded to that culture. Yeah. So those will be my two takeaways from that.
Well, I like that last point because I actually, yes, I say that a lot to my students, especially when they want to do things that touches on cultures that they're not a part of, and they want to leverage anything from another culture for their projects. I say you have to have cultural competency. You gotta have it. If you out here just skimming off the top of a culture and have no competency to what's going on in their culture, you're doomed. It's disrespectful, but then on top of being disrespectful, you're dooming yourself from the gate, right? Like, so I agree with what you're saying. Like, it got to be some level of knowledge or foot in the game in that culture. And it didn't seem like the founders of this company had a foot in it. It's kind of like they came upon it and was like, oh, well, we can leverage it for our company. Like we there's a difference between trash talk and then being in the street ball culture. There's a difference. Like there may be some overlap, but there's a very big difference in how that goes. So yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay the creator, specifically the designer too.
Right.
You could tell he was really passionate.
Yeah, he was definitely for sure.
But there is a little, like you said, cultural competency, cultural education. You got to kind of have someone show you the ropes, someone ground you in what's what in order to maintain that. I think.
And they probably, in all honesty, they probably was making so much money, it probably wasn't even a thought, right? Like what? You know how much money? I'm good. So yeah, good points. For me, learning lessons, I don't even know if it's really learning lessons because, oh my God, I swear, I felt like as soon as this documentary started, I knew how it was going to end. I swear, I felt like, oh, we going to, and I don't even, not even just to be like, buy it. It's just like, all right, because I know AND1. I grew up on AND1, and I see where the company is at today. The company is still around, mind you. managed by a company, investment firm that manages brands. So they're still around, but obviously not with the same impact and significance to the culture. But it's still around. But I feel like once I didn't know the story, but as soon as I heard the story, as soon as I saw it in the first 5 minutes, like, oh, we started in our dorm rooms at Wharton. I was like, oh, this. I already know where this is gonna go, and not because it was started in Wharton at business school by three white guys, right? That's not even the issue. But the issue is that for what the brand represented, there's no way that this can start at Wharton and then remain the sustainable culture phenomenon that it was, unless you start infusing it with people from the culture. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, oh, this is not going to end good. And I just kept watching it, and I watched the whole doc for all the good times and when everybody was high and, high on life. And then I was like, oh, here we go. But I do want to say another thing, and again, this is my opinion, not a takeaway. I'm very averse to starting businesses around the culture. Right.
Is that because the tides shift so soon? Why? I'm just curious.
Oh man, like this is like I've tried to do a business. I've tried a few businesses around the culture, and the culture changes, right? Which is fine because we could change with the culture. We can change with the culture. I do think that a lot of culture-based businesses, we blur the lines so much, right? We blur the lines a lot, and then it's like it feels manipulative, if I would say this, right? So let you know what I mean? Like it, and I'm probably not even communicating what I'm really trying to get at. But let's take it from a perspective of music and hip hop and rap, right? Like it's for the culture, right? But we see it all the time, especially with the rap crews. At least I see it growing up, right? Everyone's talking about their family. We this, we a family, and all these business deals is going around. But a lot of people are not compensated correctly, or they're not even knowledgeable, right? And then also there are hard conversations that have to be had. Sometimes people feel like because they're a contributor that they are entitled to equity. I don't know the right answer. It all depends, right? Like,
yeah.
If a person is contributing the financial funding and you're contributing, I don't know, some content, and not to dismiss the content, I don't know where the balance lies on compensation and how one should be compensated or not. And that's on a case-by-case basis, right? But when you start doing it, it's a bit easier when you try to keep it strictly business and the business isn't based on the culture. But if you start doing it on the culture, I just feel like when you under that umbrella of the culture, lines get blurred very fast, and then you kind of end up like an AND1 situation where it's like we was family, but then because no one was really talked to about the business side of things, and then once this information starts coming out, it's like, but I thought we was family. What about the culture? And even in the AND1, it was like the announcer, what was his name, DJ? Oh man, what was his name?
Can't remember.
Yeah. He was like, oh, DJ Set Free. He was like, I'm gonna get a check. They like, so then you start having these factions, and I mean, you have this happen in other arenas of business. You have this tech, you have this in finance. It's not that conflicts don't happen in other sectors of business, but I just feel like, and it might just be me from my personal connection to the culture, because I am of the culture. It just feels like it's too many landmines to even try to navigate. You'll be battling more than actually working on the business.
You got to really have that passion, right? That creator had to kind of work through all
for every brand that I've seen, every company that I've seen, every brand that I've seen that has been built around the culture, right? You'll have a few at the top that have become successful from that company, from the culture. A nice little handful, enough, but then the graveyard of fallen soldiers, you know what I'm saying, who have the stories of how they were gypped and robbed because they're understanding, you know, it just, I don't know, it's just something I'd rather not get involved with nowadays. But I tried. I'm not gonna say I tried, and maybe I'll try again in the future. And this is just where I'm at now. But that's just my take on cultural based businesses.
Yeah, no, I hear that, and I think they might have benefited from some of that advice.
Right. Oh yeah, they might have. They might have. Yeah, that's just my own little musings on culture based business. And we should probably also clarify when we say for the culture, because there's a lot of culture based business. I'm speaking specifically to Black culture based business. Right, like I'm not, just to be clear to anybody who's listening who may not understand what we're talking about in that regard. So yeah.
What do you give it at a letter grade? Let's give it a letter grade.
I mean, I'm gonna give it like a letter grade. I'll give it a B. I mean, I felt there was a lot of information that I would have enjoyed getting more insight into. Actually, felt like there was a lot of information that I would have really liked to dig more into. But overall, it was a good story, good telling. Yeah, I wish it was a little bit longer, and I guess that goes back to the information. So I'll give it a B.
Yeah, I'm about the same, maybe a minus. I'll throw on mine a little B
Okay,
minus. But all the same reasons, all the same things. It's like it was good. There was nothing wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
I could have benefited from a little bit.
A little bit more. And on one last note, I will say one part that I really did enjoy in this documentary, though. I really liked when the players got to play at Madison Square Garden.
Like, that was a good feel-good moment.
I really enjoyed that. It was like, yeah, that made me feel good. That was nice to see them, get to play in the Garden, and it's like most basketball players' dream is to get to play in the Garden. So to see that and see how they were so excited and happy, that was a good part of it. But yeah, all right. So all that to say, thought it was a good documentary. Some good learning lessons, and it was also entertaining at the same time. So it wasn't like you had to be so like you can watch this even if you don't have no business aspirations, I would say, right? You could just
right, or even if you don't care about basketball,
right? Even if you don't care about basketball. So in that regards, is definitely I would recommend watching it. Solid overall. And yeah, and as you go on your own business journey, hopefully you take some lessons, and especially if you're starting a business based on the culture. You know what I mean? Please try not to make the same mistakes that AND1 made as well. All right, so that's a wrap for this week's episode. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and thoughts around this movie, and hopefully it provides you with some value as you navigate through your business journey and personal life. As always, if you have a question you would like us to answer on the show, shoot us a message on any of our social media channels or shoot us an email at questions@businessgrindshow.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe and share on Spotify and iTunes. See you again soon. In the meantime, keep grinding.
The Business Grind is for entertainment purposes. Opinions expressed are those solely of the host and guests. Please consult with a professional and exercise discretion before engaging in any business endeavors.
I'm out here on the grind. I'm out here on the grind.